tell us about your career as a police officer.
Well, I worked for the New York City Police Department for 20 years. It was all in uniform patrol, and I worked in different places throughout the city, mostly in the borough of Manhattan and Queens. And again, I was in uniform patrol, so I was always assigned to radio calls for help from Central.
Around 9/11, how long had you been with the department?
I was on the job at that point for about 16 and a half years.
Okay.
And I was currently assigned to police headquarters, which is One Police Plaza in Lower Manhattan. It was about a 10-15 minute walk from the World Trade Center.
And so bring us to that day and to your story and what you experienced and dealing with the aftermath.
Well, the previous night, the night of September 10th into September 11th, I was working a midnight shift. So from 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. At 8 a.m. on the morning of September 11th, I went off duty. I changed out of my uniform, put on my civilian clothes, and I then proceeded to go home like I always did. I got into Queens at about 8:25 in the morning. And the thing that I remember most is that it was a beautiful, glorious September morning that day. Bright blue sunshine, no clouds. And I remember thinking that I wanted to do something instead of just go home and go to sleep because I was going to have to come back to work that night. Well, I was listening to music on my car radio, and about the time, right at the time that the first tower was struck, the music just went off. The radio went dead. And I didn't know what was going on, and within a minute, a man's voice came on and said that an important message he had to give and that a small passenger plane had flown into the north tower of the World Trade Center. I immediately pulled over. I took out my cell phone and I was attempting to call my wife, Dawn, who worked down very close to the World Trade Center. I couldn't get through. It wasn't working. I then figured I better go home and use the landline. When I got home, I was a short distance at that point. When I got home, I then found out that a second plane had flown into the south tower of the World Trade Center. I knew at that point something was up. It couldn't have been an accident. So I then tried to call Dawn via the landline. But naturally, with cell phone service being out, the landline's overloaded and I couldn't get through. I put the television on and I could see what everybody else was seeing at that point. The towers were burning, planes were sticking out of them. An emergency message began to come across the bottom of the screen, requesting from New York City all off-duty emergency personnel to proceed back to work. I knew I had to go back, but at the same time, I didn't know if Dawn was okay. So I attempted to call my command. It took me about 30 minutes to get through via the landline. Kept hitting redial. I finally got through. I spoke to my supervisor and I informed him about Dawn. And I asked him if he would give me extra time before going back because I knew I wasn't going to be able to concentrate on performing, my police duty without knowing if Dawn was okay or even alive for that matter. He said to me he understood, and he said, as soon as you hear anything, Nick, please come back immediately. And he told me to bring a whole set of fresh uniforms, clean uniforms, he said, because you're not going to be going home for a while. You're going to be here for a long time. I kept waiting it out, and maybe around 40 minutes to an hour after I spoke with him, I then got a phone call. And it was the boyfriend of one of Dawn's coworkers. And he told me that he had Dawn and his girlfriend with him in Brooklyn, that they had successfully walked over the Brooklyn Bridge, and that they were in good health. Naturally, they were dirty and very upset. And I told him to tell her that I was okay, that I had made it home before it happened, but that I was being ordered to go back to work and that I had to go back immediately. I really would have loved to have stayed there and waited for Dawn to come home to give her a hug and a kiss, but I knew I had to go back. So I immediately just packed everything up and I began to make my way back to work. And I had a very difficult time getting back because now the bottom half of Manhattan Island was sealed up. Like there was no movement. No cars were getting in, no cars were getting out. I was only able to get into Midtown, and then I had to make my way downtown on foot. And as I started to get closer and closer to Ground Zero, I could not believe how empty the streets were. This was a business day in Manhattan, and there wasn't a soul walking on those streets. There wasn't a car passing. And as I got really close to Ground Zero, I encountered military personnel. The National Guard had already been dispatched. They were literally on the street corners with M16 rifles. And at that point I realized, I said, wow, this is not anything that's normal. This is like abnormal to me. Eventually I made my way back to my command, went on duty in uniform, and I was dispatched to the outer perimeter of Ground Zero to provide security and relief for the guys that were working there. And I just went straight through. I mean, I didn't make it home probably for over a week, maybe close to 10 days. We just worked and slept at the command. They had a dormitory, slept at the command, went back on duty. Work, went back on duty. And in every now and then I was able to call Dawn and I was able to speak to her and make sure she was okay, let her know I was okay. But it just went on from there, and the fires just kept burning and burning, and every time more rubble got uncovered, a flame would flare up because now it got some air and started to go again. And it was a brutal stretch. It was, of course, a very sad day. 23 NYPD officers perished when those towers collapsed. 343 New York City firefighters perished when those towers collapsed. And it's just, you know, a horrible, horrific day that I will remember for the rest of my life.
What time, you mentioned when you finally got there, what time was that, would you say?
It was close to 12 noon, about 12 noon.
Okay. So
Yeah.
so that was around noon when you were at Ground Zero, or when you were at the perimeter?
I was at the perimeter at about 12 noon.
At 12 noon. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did I know it's a big department. Did you know the officers that perished? Did you know them?
I knew a few of them.
Mm-hmm.
I had worked with them. Nice guys, terrific guys, good cops. The others I didn't know. But, you know, in my line of work, you know, it was like we're all brothers. We're all brothers in blue. So, you know, I felt just as sad and upset for the ones I didn't know as much as for the ones I did know. It was, again, a very rough time. And then, of course, it was going to a lot of funerals and memorial services, and it just seemed like it went on forever.
And you know, I mean, as you said, I mean, you dealt a lot with the aftermath, right?
Yes.
And would you say in some ways, was that harder than the actual day, or how would you characterize that?
Well, I would probably put them equal. I mean, I can't imagine being there when those buildings were collapsing. I saw them on television like everybody else, since I had already made it home. I can't imagine what it would have been like to see those towers coming down, the noise that they made, and then, of course, all the rubble and soot that went up into the air. I mean, daytime turned to nighttime within a few minutes. Again, like I said, it was a beautiful, clear day. And then there was just this dark cloud that just hung over Lower Manhattan, that on those streets, even when I was still walking down there a couple of hours later, it was like I was walking at night. There was just no sun. Couldn't see anything. The sun had disappeared that day. at least in Lower Manhattan.
That is one of the bizarre things about it. I mean, it was a beautiful day, and then on such a beautiful day for something like that to happen is just it's eerie.
Yeah. Oh, and I just want to add
Yeah,
that the reason why the cell phone service was out, unbeknownst to me at the time, was that the main antenna for cell phone service was on the roof of the North Tower. So when the North Tower got struck, the antenna, I guess, took on damage, and that was it for cell phone service. And this is why then everybody in New York had to run to landlines. And when you have 8 million people running to landlines, the circuit's overloaded, and you just could not get through. So the worst part was the uncertainty of not knowing what was going on with Dawn, and her not knowing about me, because there were some days, you know, if I had an arrest or picked up on a late assignment, I would stay beyond 8 o'clock. So Dawn didn't know if that particular morning I had gone home yet. She wasn't sure. So she didn't know if I was okay, and I didn't know if she was okay. And that was the worst part, because now that was in my backyard. It was us.
And just to be clear, how long of a period of time would you say you didn't know whether or not she was okay?
Okay, the North Tower was struck at about 8:47. South Tower was at 9:02. The South Tower collapsed first, even though it was struck second. It came down just before 10 o'clock. The North Tower came down about 10:30 a.m. So from the time the whole thing began at 8:47, I found out that she was okay at about 11 a.m., maybe a little bit later. So it was well over 2 hours of just not knowing what had happened to her. And again, just to repeat, this is why I felt that there was no way I'd be able to concentrate on my police duty until I knew for certain that A, she was okay, and B, that she was going to come home.
Once you were there, what did you experience? I mean, what did you see? Who did you talk to?
It's hard to put it in words. I mean, people were walking around dazed, like they didn't know which way was up. Everybody was, of course, covered in just this white soot. Others were not just covered, but they were bleeding. They had sustained all types of cuts and injuries, and people just didn't know what had happened, didn't know if more was coming, and they didn't know where to go. They didn't know what to do, and it was just trying to help them as best I could, to direct them to either closer to their house or to somebody that they knew that lived in Manhattan, or, you know, just to get their name in case someone later on was going to ask about them. I could say, yes, I spoke with this person, and this person is fine. It was just so much uncertainty. Again, by this point, we had heard about the Pentagon, and we had heard that the plane was crashed in Pennsylvania. So we didn't know if more was coming. We didn't know how many more planes were going to strike the United States. So that's what was so hard to deal with. As a police officer, we're trained to always know what to do, have the answers, help people, know how to direct them. And yet, at that point, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know. I was just trying to use my own logic and common sense, as well as my police training, and trying to figure out what I could do to help people. Every ambulance in New York City was dispatched there. I mean, it was just crazy.
And so was your main job to help with the security?
Yes, my main job was to help with security and to help with people walking by that were just looking for some direction, some answers, just wanted to know what they should do. You know, again, more people that work in Manhattan live out of Manhattan. So we called it the outer boroughs. So most of your workers had to get to the outer boroughs. And now they just didn't know what to do because cars weren't being allowed out, cars weren't being allowed in. Trains were running only to Midtown. They were not allowed down to the bottom half of the island. So people just didn't know what to do, how they were going to get home. And that's what I was there for, to provide security for Ground Zero and to assist people any way I could.
How long were you at that spot? Did you, did it last months, or how long, in terms of being providing security at the perimeter?
I was there for about a month, and then I was then allowed to go back to headquarters and provide my normal function from there. But we went on overtime shifts for a long time. You know, the money now was coming, it was being federally funded. They were helping out. So we were just all working long hours and you know, again, it was just a lot of time away from home. And of course with Dawn, I mean, I would speak to her from time to time, but I just wasn't, like, I wasn't able to go home. I was just there.
And now, you mentioned you guys lived in Queens at the time?
Yes, yes, we did.
I know it never gets back to normal. When do you think, did it ever?
Well, it never really returned to normal because anytime a threat was exposed or CIA kicked up something, right away the city would go back into a high alert. And extra cops now were on the street, and we had to start performing inspections of like trucks, oversized vehicles, and this just went on. And then eventually you would say, okay, we're gonna lower our security for a little bit, but then something else would come about, and then it just ramped right back up again. And it was always a constant reminder of September 11th, and this is the way it was going to be now, especially in New York City.
At what point did you move to Iowa?
We relocated to Iowa in July of 2006. When 9/11 happened, I had about 3.5 more years left to my career. You needed to do 20 years in the NYPD in order to be eligible for a full pension. You could go beyond, but you had to do 20. So I had 16.5 at the time, and I had 3.5 more to go. And it was at that point that I began to speak to Dawn about when my time was up, maybe we would relocate. Because now, in addition to all the other negative things that a big city has, now the fact that we were a target. If anything like this was going to happen again, it was going to be in New York. So that was then that we began to entertain thoughts about leaving.
You okay?
I started coughing, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
I'm trying to hold it back, but
No,
as soon as I makes it worse.
Oh yeah, you got to get a drink for that. Yeah, Dawn's getting your bottle. Okay.
Thank you so much. I'll be okay.
So that's, you know, that's pretty amazing that, because you're from New York, right?
Yes, born and raised.
And your life was there, but because of 9/11, you felt it's just not safe to be here, and chose to relocate to Iowa.
Yes, and I mean, 9/11 wasn't the sole reason, but it was one of the bigger reasons. The other reasons were a much higher cost of living and a lot of traffic all the time, high crime rate. So when you factored all of those together, 9/11 was really the one that put it over the top. And that's when we decided to relocate.
without having you move, I can go grab it. Is it right if I just grab his stuff and then he can talk about that? You need a water too?
I was just gonna say, maybe I get a sip of. Okay.
And you can
Have
have
water.
it. Oh, we'll wait till you get your water. Before.
Okay, I'm sorry, but
No. You know, you could, as you mentioned, the transportation out of the city, there was no transportation. I was supposed to take a
Yeah.
Peter Pan bus out of the Port Authority back to Amherst, Massachusetts, but everything was shut down, so I was stuck there all day. And like you said, all the same things about no cell phone service. And my family, you know,
yeah,
they were freaking out and not being able to find transportation out, and then not knowing what was gonna come next. That was, I think, the scariest thing. Like you said, just watching those when the towers collapsed in that mushroom cloud, Manhattan. You know you're there and you can't get out, and you don't know what's coming. I mean, that was, it was like Independence
Oh,
Day.
yeah.
You know, is this real?
absolutely.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that mask and you know, what instructions you were given and why you used it and all that?
Sure. Well, after the towers collapsed and all that soot and rubble went up in the air, as well as asbestos, we in the NYPD, we were assigned these air filter masks to walk around with, and it has a circular filter here, and the air will come in through the filter first, so that inside the mask you're breathing air that's a little cleaner. And every couple of days you had to change the filter, and the filter would go in white and come out black. And we had to wear these for several weeks. And most of the people, the civilians, they didn't have these, so people were just walking around mostly with painter's masks. And but we, when the police department and other emergency personnel had gotten these, the NYPD must have gotten them from the military. And it became like basically part of our equipment. Like we had to have it now. And it just seemed, again, strange that I'm out there performing police duty in a mask. In a mask. I mean, I thought to myself, wow, like people coming up to me asking for help and I'm in a mask. You know, they might think like, this is, you know, is he really an officer if he's wearing a mask? But this is what we had to do because the air was just so polluted. It was just terrible.
Do you have any concerns about, I know we've heard the stories about people that have had issues.
Yes. You know, now 16 years have passed and I'm beginning to hear from guys that I keep in contact with. Most of the guys I worked with have retired themselves. And I'm beginning to hear from guys I work with that other officers are coming down with all types of complications, mostly breathing disorders. But we've already lost 2 officers that I worked with directly in my command that were there at September 11th, have died from cancer. One had stomach cancer and one had brain cancer. These were not old guys. These were guys that were my age, late 40s, early 50s. And we feel that it's probably attributed to 9/11 and the air that we breathed in for all that time. So yes, it definitely is a concern of mine. And I was just recently informed that the NYPD has set up deals with hospitals around the country. We're given ID cards that we were there at September 11th, and that we can go to hospitals and present that ID card, and we will get free checkups since we were at 9/11, and New York City will pay for it.
Okay.
So this is what now that's being done because they're beginning to hear more and more officers that were there are coming down with all types of health disorders.
Is that all throughout the country or just in New York City?
No, it's throughout the country because they realize that officers have relocated and that it would be very difficult for someone like myself to return back to New York just to get a physical. So they've made deals with hospitals all around the country that they will accept the ID card and send the bill to New York City.
I mean, now all these years later, what do you make of it, of the whole thing?
Well, it's tough to say. It was an attack on us. It was an attack on our way of life. And naturally, that makes me angry. That brought some anger about. I have nothing but sympathy and sorrow for all the people that lost their lives there, families that had members that perished there. You know, again, I knew some of the officers that died there, but my wife and I, we also knew civilians that perished there as well. So it was just a rough time, and it's hard to put it into words. Naturally, I would never want to see anything like that happen again. I hope it doesn't. But I guess now this is the world we live in, that now we have to always think about that something like that could happen again. You know, the United States does have enemies, and you know, this is a possibility, unfortunately.
Have you been back?
Yes, I have. As recent as this past May, we went back. My wife had a business trip, and I went with her, and we were able to meet up with family and friends, and we went down to Ground Zero, which now has been rebuilt. When we left in 2006, 5 years already removed from September 11th, there was nothing there. There was just still a big hole in the ground. It was all tied up in the courts, figuring how it was going to get rebuilt. And so we never saw it. And the rebuilding, I think, started around 2009, maybe 2010. And when we went back in May of this year, it's all finished. And we now saw what is there. They built one tower, the Freedom Tower it's called. Again, 110 stories, just as the two Twin Towers were. Excuse me.
Sure.
They built it on the site of one of the towers. And on the site of the other tower, they then built the memorial and a museum, which we attended. We went into the museum, we went to the memorial, and we also went to the Freedom Tower. And it was very touching, very touching. And of course, it brought back all those memories.
Thank you, Nick. I think that's good, unless there's anything else we missed or you want to say.
No, I think we covered everything. I'm just so grateful that myself and my wife, Dawn, made it home alive.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. And Dawn, where did you work at the time?
I worked for an insurance broker at Willis downtown. We were a few blocks away from the Trade Center.
And so bring us to, so that morning, had you already, what time did you go to work?
I'm an early person, so I actually was in the office about probably 7:15.
Okay.
So my day started already and started working, you know, on my projects and stuff like that way before anything happened. And it was just like what Nick had said, it was just a beautiful day. I was saying, wow, I wish I could, you know, leave early or something, because it was so sunny and just, I don't know, it was just something different about the day. But yeah, I was in about probably 7:15 before, I'm usually was there before most of my coworkers would get there.
And what was that day like for you? What did you experience?
Wow. Well, I was in my boss's office when obviously the first plane had hit.
Mm-hmm.
So we just thought it was, you know, a commercial plane that gone bad, not realizing that it was any form of anything else, a terrorist attack. And so the first plane hit the North Tower, and our building shook just from, I guess, the impact. and we were just told to stay inside. And so we were just waiting, but obviously within the wait, you had before family members that were calling, that everybody knew what it was. So that was hard because I had like my mother, my sister calling me to tell me to leave the building, but I just felt that I was safe if I stood in the building and just waited for, for further instructions for us to leave. But it was just everybody was, I guess, panicking. So we waited, and so then all of a sudden a second plane at 9:02 struck, and that's when our building really shook, and they were afraid the glass was going to shatter everywhere. So the president of the company ran and said that we need to leave. And this part that's, I was supposed to be in the North Tower. There was a restaurant, Windows of the World. I was supposed to have a breakfast meeting with, it was a video conferencing, and we were with our London office. And 20 minutes before we were supposed to leave, me and my coworker, we received a phone call from London and says that we had to make a change to the presentation. So that 20 minutes that he kept me in the office, it literally was the 20 minutes that saved my life, because I actually forgot to tell Nick that I was even going to have this meeting. Usually, I don't know what happened the night before. Normally I'll say, oh, I'm not going to be in the office, so if you call me, I'll be somewhere else. But for some reason, I just forgot to mention that I was going to be at the Trade Center. And the 20 minutes that I was on the phone was basically because we would have been at Windows of the World, which is on the top floor, without my family or my husband knowing that I was even up there. So just thinking about that at times. But we were just instructed we had to leave at that point. But the whole city downtown was just chaos. Everyone was running everywhere, listening. Emergency services was there, first telling us to go. I worked nearby the South Street Seaport. They were sending us towards the seaport at first, and then it was just so much going on. Then they were basically telling us to go back towards the Brooklyn Bridge. But unfortunately, between the time that basically this South Tower got hit, and then all of a sudden there was like this loud sound, something I've never heard before. It sounded like there was like hundreds of planes overhead, to realize that the South Tower was now coming down. And they were just yelling at everyone to try to take cover. So before I left our office, myself and a coworker, we made a promise that we were not going to, we were going to hold each other's hand and not let go until we got to safety. So the whole time, we just said that we weren't going to let go. So when basically the tower came down, we were told there was a utility truck, and we were told to kind of go under the truck and just put our heads down. We didn't really have masks at the time because no one knew that this was going to happen. But one of the local restaurants gave everyone the linen, like the napkins and stuff, so that we basically had something to cover our face. And we just held each other's hands and put our heads down and waited. But it was so eerie because it was beautiful sunshine, and in a matter of like a minute, it turned to darkness. It was just dark the whole downtown, and it was really silent. It was, even though there was thousands of people just everywhere, it was really silent because no one, could believe that this was happening. So after it we felt that it stopped, we got up, and at that point we were just covered. But I think debris was coming down because I noticed that I had like some blood and stuff on the side, and I must have just gotten hit by something when I went underneath the utility truck. But we didn't care at that point. It's like your adrenaline is just roaring, and it was just the survival mode just came, and we just decided we couldn't, transportation, we couldn't get on subways or anything, everything just was closed. So I worked in Manhattan, but I lived in Queens. So now I am not knowing if Nick was safe. It was just like a worry. I was worrying about myself, then I was worrying because a lot of times they would call him and tell him to stay. So I didn't know if Nick was at by the trade centers, if he was on his way home. So just knowing, not knowing where he was, just everything, it was to go through your mind. But all I knew that I had to get home and to be safe. And it was we walked, it took about 7 hours to get home because we had to walk over the bridge. But once I got over the bridge, my friends, we went to her boyfriend's job on the other side of the bridge, and he, for some reason, was able to get a hold of Nick to let him know that we were actually safe and that we were, you know, in his office now, that we were just trying to clean up a little. And they would make sure that I got as close to home as I could, but everything stopped. The traffic, if you, on the highways, people were stopping to pick up people, to bring them to safety. So they took me to a certain point, and then the rest of the way I just had to get home on my own. And I wasn't thinking, I just kept walking and just trying to make sense of everything that had happened a few hours before then. It was just, I've never thought I would see anything like that before. It was just horrible.
So you walked from Manhattan over the Brooklyn Bridge to
Queens, but I had to, yeah. Wow. But once I got over, I mean, there was a lot of walking on the highway, and because everything was at a standstill. And until I got closer to home, and then to get from where we lived downtown, I had to take an express bus, so I went to my car. And when I got to my car, well, I just had to kind of take a little breather for a few minutes, and I just started crying, and I was just happy that I was actually still alive, because it was just amazing that day.
So that's remarkable. So you were actually supposed to be...
I was supposed to be in the towers it was basically a video conferencing meeting, and that morning, and one of the London brokers, if he didn't call, I would have been there already. It was, yeah, to think about it, just to think that I didn't get to tell anybody. So no one would have known in my family that I was there. They would have thought, I was probably making my way home already. And, but yeah, that 20 minutes was the 20 minutes that, when I look at it, saved my life. Yeah.
That's unbelievable.
That whole day was unbelievable. It was just, and just even after it, just the whole, you see movies, growing up, you would see those war movies, and you would see all the rubble and debris on the streets, and not to realize that what was happening, and it was because someone hated, it was hate. It was another country basically showing their hatred towards the U.S. So just to think, we were all brought up to love one another and love your neighbor, and then for this to happen was just something just so unreal.
When you think back now, I mean, that's such a to know that you were supposed to be there, at that restaurant on top of the World Trade Center, and because of that call, it didn't happen. That must be, what is that like?
Well, I believe that things happen for a reason. I've always believed in that, and I just was not meant to be in the tower that day. That, it was just, I was being protected. I mean, that's all I kind of chalk it up to. I just was not meant to be in that tower. And I think about it at times, like no one would have known. They even, until like Nick would have called, the office once everything, it probably would have been a day or two, because we weren't allowed back into the office for at least 3 weeks. After, we were just told to, I think they let us one day just to get our laptops, but I worked from home a lot after that. But I was just so, just the whole day just affected me really. I mean, like, affected everyone the same, but just to be there, I just couldn't make sense of it. And there was a lot of anger as well that I had, that how could someone or people be so cruel that they would want to harm innocent people. So I had to try to work that in within myself, and it was just terrible. I mean, it just affected, it's changed. I think it's definitely changed me that day, because I used to let little things worry me all the time, or things, just like little senseless little things. Now they don't bother me anymore, because I just find life is so precious. And why should I let little small things bother me now? And there's just worse things happening in our world.
You mentioned you were holding your coworker's hand.
Mm-hmm.
How long did y'all hold hands?
We held hands until we left our office. We said we were not going to let each other's hand go by. So as we were running the streets, we had to stop a few times. We just listened to emergency services. They told us to duck. We ducked. One point when we were going over the bridge, all these planes started coming overhead, and you panic. You didn't know what it was until we figured out that it was basically, I think it was the National Guards or whoever was coming over. But at that point, you didn't know, so people were running just over the bridge. But the one thing that made me feel like I felt calm at times, because, city, especially a big city like New York, everyone is just so divided. And that day, it didn't matter what color you were, what your religious background was. It's just everybody was just helping each other. If you saw somebody like sitting on the side, you would just grab them and offer for them to walk with you. It was just amazing that everybody was just so helpful. And it was just so peaceful to know that everyone, we were all in it together. Everybody wanted just to be safe.
What was the address of where you worked?
I was on Water Street. It was South Street Seaport. That was kind of like the address. So it was only a few blocks from the trade centers. And I was on, I think, the 29th floor. Oh. So we got a good view of when the plane hit. When the second plane hit, I actually wasn't standing in my boss's office, because we were just trying to figure out what we were going to do. But when the first plane hit, I mean, it was just a direct.
So you saw it?
I saw the plane hit into the towers. So just seeing that, and like I said, we just thought it was a commercial plane gone bad, until the lawyer in our office ran to the conference room and put the TV on, and they knew immediately that it was a terror attack. But we just kind of just waited around until we were told. We just felt that we were safer in the building at that point, and then just run, because it was just complete chaos downtown.
So how did that, were you guys just standing around, or were you in a meeting, or like how did you know, how did you explain that moment when you saw the plane?
Well, when we saw the plane, we just looked at each other like something just happened, and everyone started panicking a little, just, well, should we call someone, or, because we actually had contacts in there. I worked for a broker, and there were other brokers that were in that tower. And so you're thinking about people that were in that tower, still not knowing what it was, that it was a terror attack. Just a plane went into the towers, and as soon as we put the TV on, we saw it there that it was a terror attack. So of course, what goes in your mind, what's going to happen next? I mean, you didn't know whether other buildings going to be attacked. So that's just a thought.
Were you looking out a window at that moment?
Yeah, we were looking at the window. We just saw the flames coming out of the tower. It was just like a ball of flames.
But did you? I guess sorry, not to just because I'm just trying to pinpoint this exact moment. Were you did you see it happen in real time when, or did you hear something and then look and then see?
No, I was actually where my boss's, the way he was situated, I was kind of looking out the window, so I'm like talking to him, and all of a sudden I see something hit into a tower, and then there was like an explosion. So I kind of was looking that direction and saw the plane just hit the tower, and then it just exploded.
What was that like?
I was like, oh my God, you kind of let out like a squeal, and it was like, I can't believe a plane just went into the Trade Center. And then I guess in my head was, I was supposed to be in that building, and that also obviously came to mind as well, knowing that tower just got hit, and that's where I was supposed to be. And then you kind of think of all that. It was just so much goes through your mind. At that time, it's your adrenaline is just on overdrive the whole time. I mean, because you don't expect something like that to happen.
Unbelievable. And just turn this off. I thought this was off. When the towers collapsed, were you gone by that point, or were you still close by?
When the first tower collapsed, we were actually down on the street level. We were trying to make our way through, and all of a sudden the sound, you could hear it. And when the second tower collapsed, we were actually on the Brooklyn Bridge. So you kind of got to see the tower as it was kind of coming down. But when the first one came down, it was just a loud, both times it was really loud, but you really heard it when you were down on the ground. And then you could just see, it was like a sea of like just dust and dirt just coming across downtown. It just got covered. I mean, went over the cars. It was just like, not like quicksand, but it was just covered, like a covering over the whole downtown. It was just really eerie. But most people were just trying to cover their faces, and that's what we did. We were told to just duck, and there was like a utility truck, so that's what we did.
I could keep going all night just because it's unbelievable. I mean, it's like a movie.
Well, that's what it is. That's what sometimes you think, because you see those. Because my dad used to love watching those old war movies, so you're looking at them, and then you're thinking about this, and it was just so, surreal that this was actually happening in the U.S.
And you knew people that died that day?
Sadly to say, a really close friend of mine, her dad was one of the chefs in Windows of the World, and he never made it out. And quite a few of former coworkers that were now working at different companies, they lost their lives, and quite a few people, they made it out of the tower, but they didn't make it because then the South Tower came down, and they were right in front, and they couldn't make it to safety. So it was, and then we knew some police officers and firemen that lost their lives helping others.
That's unbelievable. Well, thank God you made it.
Yeah, thank you.
It's just.
Well, it's like 16 years later and stuff, and it's still, for me, I still think about it like if it was yesterday, because it was just amazing, and we're just so happy to be here in Iowa because we feel safe. I mean, we just figured, it's a smaller town,
Mm-hmm.
and we just knew we had to leave New York, and because after that, I was a nervous wreck, and you couldn't feel safe anymore, because even if you heard like a car backfire, people used to jump. I was just a nervous wreck. I mean, I just knew that we had to leave, and when Nick did his 20 years, we knew that we were going to be far. And I've been back since then, but I don't feel like that's home anymore. Like when we go, I travel for business there occasionally, and I just can't wait to leave.
Really?
It's just, it doesn't feel like home anymore, and you just kind of just always worry.
Is that because you've been away for so long, or because when after that happened, it just changed something in you?
I think it's a little of both. We're just really happy here, excuse me. And then just to think of what happened in New York, who says it can't happen again in the big city? And just, I don't feel comfortable. Crowds now, I just don't feel safe around crowds. And now I try to not put myself in situations where I'm around a lot of people, because I just don't feel safe anymore.
Yeah. Well, that's, thank you for
Yeah, thank you.
sharing.
Yeah.
That's powerful stuff.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable. I can't imagine. Yeah, we're good on that.